I was lying on the polished floor of my younger brother Mason's extravagant graduation party, one hand wrapped around my 7-month pregnant belly while terror spread through my body. My wheelchair had just been flipped over by my own father, Richard, because I refused to hand over my grandfather's house. Around me stood wealthy guests, frozen in shock, while my mother, Diane, worried more about social embarrassment than my safety. But none of them knew that I had already activated a silent emergency plan that would change all our lives forever. My name is Olivia, and if you saw me moving through the sunny streets of Nashville, Tennessee, you would probably assume I had built a peaceful life. I worked as a successful remote graphic designer, lived in a beautiful ranch home, and spent my days creating art for clients around the country. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Yet hidden beneath that image was a lifetime of pain, resilience, and survival. My wheelchair had been part of my life since childhood because of a progressive spinal condition that permanently changed my future. When I was 9 years old, other children were running through playgrounds and learning dance routines. I was learning how to navigate ramps, avoid dangerous curbs, and manage constant pain shooting through my back. The world was not designed for people like me, but I adapted because I had no other choice. What hurt far more than my condition was growing up inside a home where I was treated as an inconvenience instead of a daughter. My father, Richard, cared deeply about appearances. He was a respected corporate executive who demanded perfection from everyone around him. A disabled daughter never fit into his carefully crafted image. Whenever important guests visited our house, I was quietly pushed into another room and forgotten. My mother rarely defended me. She preferred peace over confrontation and spent years pretending not to notice my suffering. Every day I felt invisible. Then there was Mason, my younger brother by 4 years. He was athletic, charming, and everything my father admired. The entire household revolved around his desires. If Mason wanted expensive sports equipment, he got it immediately. If he wanted private coaching or luxury vacations, my parents somehow found the money. Meanwhile, my physical therapy appointments were often postponed because they were supposedly too expensive. I learned to shrink myself emotionally just to survive. Everything changed 5 years ago when my grandfather Edward passed away. He had always understood me better than anyone else. He would sit beside my wheelchair for hours, telling stories and encouraging my creativity. Most importantly, he knew exactly who Richard truly was. When his will was read, he shocked everyone. Instead of leaving his historic ranch property to my father, he gave it directly to me, along with a medical trust designed to protect my future. That decision ignited a dangerous obsession inside my family. Over the following years, they pressured me constantly, convincing me to finance Mason's lifestyle and support his ambitions. I transferred enormous amounts of money, hoping they would finally accept me. Instead, their greed only grew stronger. By the time Mason's graduation party arrived, my family had already decided that my home would become their next target. I had no idea that within a few hours, my father would publicly attack me and force me to make the hardest decision of my life. The day of the celebration arrived with expensive flowers, live music, and smiling guests who had no idea they were walking into a disaster. Ethan, my husband, stayed beside me all afternoon, making sure I was comfortable despite my swollen ankles and aching back. Then I asked him to retrieve my orthopedic support brace from our car. He kissed my forehead and promised he would return in less than 5 minutes. The moment he disappeared through the front doors, Richard and Mason started walking toward me together. Richard carried a thick folder under his arm, and the look in his eyes sent a chill through my entire body. I immediately understood something terrible was about to happen. What Richard demanded next would push our family beyond any possible point of return. Richard stopped directly in front of my wheelchair while Mason stood beside him wearing his graduation sash and an arrogant smile. Without greeting me, my father pulled several papers from a folder and dropped them onto my lap. I glanced down and immediately felt my heartbeat accelerate. It was a legal document transferring ownership of my grandfather Edward's ranch house to Mason for absolutely nothing. My fingers tightened around the pages as anger and disbelief flooded my body. I had already sacrificed so much for this family, yet they were still demanding more. "Sign it," Richard said coldly. "We're settling this today." I looked up at him in disbelief. "I already told you no. Ethan and I are raising our son there. That house is our future." Mason crossed his arms and laughed softly. "Your future? Olivia, be realistic. You're in a wheelchair. Why do you need a huge property? Ethan can take care of you anywhere. This house should support my business opportunities." The cruelty in his voice made my stomach twist. Even after all these years, he still saw me as less than human. I searched the room for help, hoping somebody would notice how aggressive they were being. Around us, wealthy guests laughed and drank wine, completely unaware that a family war was unfolding only a few feet away. My eyes landed on my mother. Diane was standing near the buffet table holding a glass of champagne. For a brief moment, our eyes met. She saw my fear instantly. But instead of helping me, she looked away and pretended to continue her conversation with another guest. That familiar feeling of abandonment settled heavily inside my chest. "Please stop doing this," I said quietly. "I already gave this family so much money." Richard leaned down until his face was inches from mine. "You owe this family everything. Without me, you wouldn't have survived childhood. I paid your doctors, your treatments, your equipment. The least you can do is support your brother." I clenched my jaw. "You're not entitled to my inheritance." His expression changed instantly. Years of hidden resentment surfaced all at once. His face became red with fury as he gripped the armrests of my wheelchair. "Don't embarrass me in front of everyone," he hissed. "Then let go," I said firmly. Nearby conversations began to slow as a few guests noticed the tension. Richard realized people were watching, but instead of calming down, his anger exploded. His obsession with control completely overpowered his judgment. "You ungrateful girl," he snapped. Before I could react, he violently grabbed the side of my wheelchair and shoved it with all his strength. Everything happened in seconds. The room spun around me. My body lurched sideways before crashing violently onto the hardwood floor. Pain exploded through my spine and abdomen simultaneously. A sharp cry escaped my mouth as my hands instinctively reached for my stomach. Then I felt it. Warm liquid rapidly spread beneath me. My heart stopped. My water had broken. I was 7 months pregnant. The impact had forced my body into premature labor. Panic erupted inside me as an intense contraction ripped through my abdomen. I struggled to breathe while hundreds of terrified eyes stared in silence. The music outside continued for another moment before someone abruptly shut it off. The entire room became eerily quiet. I lifted my head and looked toward Richard. He wasn't rushing to help me. He wasn't calling an ambulance. Instead, he looked terrified for one reason only. People had witnessed his actions. Beside him, Mason had gone pale. "Dad," he whispered nervously, "everyone saw that." Richard ignored me completely and started scanning the crowd, calculating how much damage this would cause to his reputation. That was the exact moment something inside me changed forever. The daughter who spent years begging for love disappeared. The woman lying on that floor understood the truth. These people were never my family. They were predators. Another painful contraction surged through my body, but I forced myself to stay focused. Slowly, without drawing attention, I raised my wrist toward my face. Months earlier, Ethan and I had created an emergency system because of my high-risk pregnancy. With one silent tap, my smartwatch activated. 911 was notified. My location was transmitted. An audio recording immediately began uploading to secure cloud storage. I lowered my hand again and waited. The trap had been set. And in the distance, I could already hear the faint sound of approaching sirens. The sirens grew louder with every passing second, but inside the hall nobody moved. Guests stood frozen, their faces filled with shock as I lay on the floor fighting through unbearable contractions. My overturned wheelchair rested a few feet away while expensive decorations and flower arrangements surrounded the scene like a cruel joke. This celebration had transformed into a crime scene in less than a minute. Richard suddenly realized the severity of what he had done. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route. He opened his mouth several times as if trying to create a believable excuse, but nothing came out. Mason looked equally terrified. For the first time in his life, his charm and confidence were useless. He was witnessing the collapse of the world my parents had spent decades building around him. Another contraction hit me hard. I gritted my teeth and focused on breathing. Fear threatened to overwhelm me, but I refused to panic. My baby needed me to stay calm. I placed both hands over my stomach and whispered softly, "Hold on, little one. Mom is right here." Suddenly, the front doors burst open. Ethan ran inside carrying my orthopedic brace before it slipped from his hands and landed on the floor. His entire body froze when he saw me lying there. Then he sprinted toward me faster than I had ever seen him move. "Olivia!" he shouted. He dropped to his knees beside me and carefully touched my face. His hands trembled as he noticed the fluid soaking through my dress. "Oh God," he whispered. "What happened?" I grabbed his sleeve and struggled to speak. "Your father-in-law pushed me. The baby is coming." His expression changed instantly. Fear became fury. He stood up and positioned himself between me and my family. Richard immediately attempted to regain control of the situation. "Ethan, listen," he said nervously. "It was an accident." She became dizzy from the heat. "Don't lie to me," Ethan roared. His voice echoed throughout the hall. Every guest fell completely silent. "You attacked your pregnant daughter," he continued. "Don't you dare pretend otherwise." Richard stepped backward for the first time in years. He was a man accustomed to controlling every conversation, but Ethan refused to let him manipulate reality. Then the emergency vehicles arrived. The flashing red and blue lights reflected through the giant windows as police officers and paramedics rushed inside. Guests immediately scattered aside to clear a path. Four paramedics surrounded me while 2 officers surveyed the room. One medic checked my pulse while another examined my abdomen. "She's in active premature labor," a paramedic announced. Ethan stayed beside me the entire time, holding my hand while they prepared the stretcher. As they carefully lifted me, I turned toward one of the responding officers. "It wasn't an accident," I said clearly. I raised my wrist and unlocked my smartwatch. My father assaulted me because I refused to sign over my inheritance. Everything was recorded. The officer took the device and pressed play. The room instantly filled with Richard's voice. "You ungrateful girl. Sign it." Then everyone heard the violent crash of my wheelchair hitting the floor. Nobody could deny what happened anymore. Richard's face lost all color. Mason staggered backward and nearly fell against a table. Years of carefully crafted reputations shattered in a matter of seconds. The officer paused the recording and looked directly at Richard. "Sir, place your hands behind your back." Richard panicked. "You don't understand," he said quickly. "This is a family misunderstanding." "No," the officer replied firmly. "This is aggravated assault." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the hall. As paramedics pushed me outside, I glanced back one final time. My mother stood frozen beneath the event tent with tears streaming down her face. But even then, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Nothing at all. Because the daughter who desperately wanted her parents' love no longer existed. Only a mother protecting her child remained. And as the ambulance doors closed, another powerful contraction surged through my body while the paramedic suddenly looked at the monitor and said something that made Ethan's face turn completely white. Our nightmare wasn't over yet. Inside the ambulance, every second felt endless. The paramedics moved quickly around me while machines monitored both my heartbeat and my baby's condition. Ethan sat beside me, gripping my hand so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. I could see the fear in his eyes, but he was trying desperately to stay strong for me. One paramedic stood at the monitor attached to my stomach and spoke with urgency. "The baby is under stress. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." My chest tightened. I closed my eyes and focused on breathing through another contraction. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced. My spinal condition complicated everything. Every movement sent sharp waves of agony through my back. "Please save my son," I whispered. "You both are our priority," the paramedic replied gently. Ethan leaned closer and kissed my forehead. "You're not alone," he said softly. "We're getting through this together." His words became my anchor. Outside the ambulance windows, Nashville blurred into streaks of lights as we sped toward Vanderbilt University Medical Center. I kept reminding myself that fear would not protect my baby. Staying calm would. Meanwhile, my phone continued vibrating with incoming messages. Guests from the party had already started contacting Ethan. Some were apologizing for not intervening sooner. Others were sending videos they had secretly recorded of the entire assault. Richard's carefully protected image was collapsing in real time. Social media was beginning to spread the story. His world was falling apart. But none of that mattered to me anymore. My son mattered. The ambulance finally arrived at the hospital, and a team of doctors immediately surrounded my stretcher. Everything moved quickly. High-risk pregnancy. Premature labor. Spinal condition. Prepare operating room access. Voices echoed all around me. Ethan stayed close as doctors wheeled me through bright hallways. The fear on his face never disappeared, but he refused to leave my side. Hours passed inside the delivery ward. The contractions intensified. Doctors monitored every movement carefully because my spinal condition created serious risks during labor. Every decision required precision. At one point, I felt completely exhausted. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered. Ethan immediately shook his head. "Yes, you can." Tears filled his eyes. You've survived your entire life. You've survived them. You're stronger than every person who tried to break you. I stared at him. For years, my family had convinced me that I was weak. Yet the strongest person in the room looked at me like I was unstoppable. That realization changed something inside me. I wasn't broken. I never had been. Another contraction arrived. I screamed. Doctors rushed into position. She's progressing. Stay with us, Olivia. Keep breathing. Everything became a blur of pain and determination. Hours later, while resting between contractions, Ethan received a phone call from one of the police officers. He stepped away briefly before returning. His face looked stunned. What happened? I asked. Your smartwatch recording isn't the only evidence. I stared at him. Several guests recorded everything. I blinked in surprise. Everything? He nodded. Richard can't deny anything. Multiple videos captured the entire assault. For the first time since the party, a small sense of peace entered my heart. He couldn't manipulate reality anymore. He couldn't rewrite history. He couldn't silence me. His power was gone forever. Then another contraction slammed into my body. Doctors rushed toward me again. It's time, one doctor announced. The room instantly shifted into high alert. Everyone moved into position. Ethan grabbed my hand once more. You're almost there, he whispered. I squeezed his hand with all my strength. After years of abuse, humiliation, and fear, everything was about to change. A new life was entering the world. A new beginning was being born. And while I prepared to meet my son for the first time, none of us knew that a devastating update about Richard had just arrived from the police station. The news would shock everyone. The delivery room remained tense as doctors continued monitoring every change in my condition. My body was exhausted, but I refused to surrender. Every contraction reminded me why I was fighting. My son deserved a safe beginning, and I was determined to give him one despite everything that had happened. Ethan stood beside me without leaving for even a second. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were red from exhaustion, but his determination never wavered. Every time I opened my eyes, he was there. Then his phone vibrated again. He glanced at the screen and frowned before stepping aside to answer. I watched him quietly. After a few moments, he returned looking both surprised and relieved. What happened? I asked. The police finished questioning everyone at the party. I nodded weakly. There were dozens of witnesses. He sat beside me. More than that. Several of Richard's corporate colleagues gave official statements against him. I blinked. Against him? Ethan nodded. They said this wasn't the first time they had seen his abusive behavior. That information stunned me. For years, I believed everyone admired my father. I thought nobody could see behind his carefully crafted image. But apparently, people had noticed warning signs all along. Some said they were afraid to speak up before, Ethan explained. Today changed everything. I exhaled slowly. Secrets always survive in darkness. Today, someone finally turned on the lights. Then another contraction hit hard, forcing my attention back to the present. Doctors immediately gathered around. Almost there, one doctor said. I squeezed Ethan's hand. Hours passed. Every minute felt like an hour. Then suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. Final push, the doctor instructed. I gathered every ounce of strength left inside me. Years of pain. Years of rejection. Years of fighting for acceptance. Everything poured into that moment. Then it happened. A loud cry filled the room. Time stopped. Tears instantly flooded my eyes. The doctor smiled warmly. "You have a healthy baby boy." My chest shook with emotion as they gently placed him on my chest. He was beautiful. Perfect. Tiny fingers wrapped around mine. For the first time in my life, complete peace entered my heart. All the fear disappeared. All the anger dissolved. Everything became silent except for his tiny breaths. Ethan leaned over us with tears running down his face. "Hi there, Caleb," he whispered. Our son opened his eyes briefly. I smiled through my tears. "Welcome home." At that moment, I understood something important. The cycle was over. The abuse ended with me. My son would never question whether he was loved. He would never earn affection through sacrifice. He would never be treated as less than enough. Hours later, while I rested with Caleb sleeping beside me, a detective arrived. He carried a folder full of documents. "Mrs. Olivia," he said gently, "we wanted to update you." I sat up carefully. The evidence against Richard is overwhelming. He opened the folder. Audio recordings, multiple videos, witness statements, and medical reports all support the charges. Ethan listened closely. The detective continued. "Richard has officially been charged with aggravated assault against a pregnant woman causing serious bodily injury." I closed my eyes. It was real. Justice had finally begun. Then the detective added something unexpected. Mason may also face consequences. I looked up. Why? Financial investigations uncovered suspicious transactions involving inheritance pressure and money transfers. My stomach turned. Years of manipulation were now being uncovered. The lies were unraveling one by one. Before leaving, the detective said something I would never forget. People like Richard survive because victims stay silent. You spoke up. That's why this happened. After he left, I looked at my sleeping son. Maybe that was true. Maybe silence had protected my abusers for decades. But that silence was over forever. Still, as peaceful as that moment felt, we had no idea that 6 months later Richard would hear a sentence in court that would leave the entire courtroom speechless. 6 months later, the atmosphere inside the Nashville courthouse was completely different from the glamorous world Richard once ruled. The man who had spent decades controlling everyone around him now sat at the defendant's table wearing a plain prison uniform. His expensive suits, polished image, and powerful reputation had vanished. I sat beside Ethan holding Caleb in my arms while waiting for the judge to enter. Richard looked older. Defeated. His shoulders were slumped, and the confidence that once intimidated everyone had disappeared entirely. Mason sat several rows behind him. He looked exhausted. The consequences of his greed had destroyed his future before it had even begun. His prestigious job offer had been withdrawn. Friends had distanced themselves. Nobody wanted to associate with the scandal anymore. Diane sat alone near the back of the courtroom. She barely looked up. For the first time in her life, she couldn't hide behind silence. The judge entered, and the room immediately stood. Everyone sat again. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully. Multiple eyewitness statements. Video recordings. Audio evidence. Medical documentation. Every piece of evidence strengthened the case. There was no room for manipulation. No room for excuses. Richard's attorney attempted one final argument. This was a tragic family misunderstanding. The judge immediately interrupted him. No. The entire room fell silent. This was deliberate violence against a vulnerable victim. Richard lowered his head. The judge continued. The victim was 7 months pregnant, physically disabled, and financially targeted. Every word landed heavily throughout the courtroom. Years of abuse were finally being acknowledged. Then came the sentence. Richard Harrison, this court sentences you to 20 years in state prison without eligibility for early parole. Gasps echoed around the room. Richard froze. His face lost all expression. 20 years. His entire future had vanished. Police officers immediately escorted him toward the exit. For a brief moment, he looked at me. Not with love. Not with regret. Only with disbelief. He genuinely couldn't understand how he had lost. That was the saddest part. Even after everything, he still believed he was the victim. I simply looked away. That chapter of my life was over. As he disappeared through the courthouse doors, a powerful sense of relief washed over me. The monster who controlled my childhood no longer controlled my future. The courtroom slowly emptied. Then another surprise arrived. Mason approached us. He looked nervous. Ashamed. Olivia, he said quietly. I stared at him without speaking. He swallowed hard. I know an apology won't fix anything. I remained silent. He lowered his eyes. I spent my entire life believing I deserved everything. Tears filled his eyes. I was wrong. Part of me expected anger. Part of me expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt nothing. Years of pain had emptied those emotions long ago. I hope you become a better person, I said calmly. That's all I have to say. He nodded slowly. Then he walked away. That was the last conversation we ever had. Months passed peacefully after that. The ranch house became a true home. Caleb grew stronger every day. His laughter filled every room. Ethan built a small nursery beside my office so I could continue working while staying close to him. Life finally felt safe. One evening, while sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan placed his arm around me. You know, he said softly, I'm proud of you. I smiled. For surviving? He shook his head. No. He kissed my forehead. For choosing love instead of becoming like them. I looked toward Caleb crawling through the grass. Maybe that was the greatest victory. Not revenge. Not prison. Not justice. Love. Because hatred destroys everyone it touches. Love builds something new. And our new life was only beginning. Still, there was one final lesson I wanted to share with everyone who might someday find themselves trapped inside a toxic family. That lesson would become the true ending of this story. Today, almost a year after that terrible night, life looks completely different. Every morning I wake up to the sound of Caleb laughing instead of the sound of anxiety living inside my mind. The house my grandfather Edward left me no longer feels like a battlefield. It feels like a sanctuary. The large oak trees surrounding the property sway gently in the Tennessee breeze while sunlight pours across the grass. Sometimes I sit on the porch and simply watch Ethan and Caleb playing together. Those ordinary moments mean everything to me now. For years, I chased approval from people who were never capable of giving love. I sacrificed money, emotional energy, and pieces of my identity trying to become worthy in their eyes. The truth was heartbreaking. Nothing would have ever been enough. People who build their lives on greed will always demand more. They don't see kindness as generosity. They see it as weakness. That was the biggest lesson my family taught me. But they also accidentally taught me something beautiful. Real family is not built through blood. Real family is built through safety, through consistency, through respect, through love that never demands you destroy yourself to earn it. Every day, Ethan proves that to me. He never asks me to become someone else. He never sees my wheelchair as a burden. He sees me, the real me. The woman who survived impossible circumstances and kept moving forward anyway. One afternoon, Caleb was crawling through the living room when he stopped beside my wheelchair and grabbed onto it with both hands. He smiled up at me. Then he laughed. That simple moment brought tears to my eyes. Because he wasn't looking at a limitation. He was looking at his mother. Nothing more. Nothing less. At that moment, I realized how deeply my childhood had shaped my fears. I spent decades believing people would only notice what I lacked. Caleb reminded me that love notices who you are, not what you can't do. That lesson healed something inside me that I didn't even realize was still broken. As for Diane, we have no relationship anymore. She sent several letters apologizing for her silence over the years. I read them once. Then I put them away. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I no longer carry hatred toward her. But I also refuse to reopen doors that nearly destroyed my life. Peace sometimes requires distance. And I choose peace every single day. As for Richard, I never visited him in prison. I never will. His choices built his future. Mine built my freedom. There is a huge difference between justice and revenge. Revenge consumes you. Justice allows you to move forward. I chose to move forward. That decision changed everything. If there is one thing I want every person listening to remember, it's this. Never sacrifice your safety to keep toxic people comfortable. Never shrink yourself to earn love. Never confuse manipulation with family loyalty. And never underestimate your own strength. The strongest moment of my life wasn't when my father was arrested. It wasn't when he was sentenced. It wasn't even when the world finally believed me. The strongest moment happened when I decided I deserved better. Everything changed after that. Now, every evening, I sit beside Ethan while Caleb falls asleep peacefully in our arms. The house is quiet. The air feels lighter. And for the first time in my entire life, home truly feels safe. My family tried to destroy me because they believed my disability made me powerless. They were wrong. Because true strength doesn't come from physical ability. It comes from courage. From resilience. From protecting the people you love. Their greed destroyed their lives. But love rebuilt mine. And honestly, that's the greatest victory I could have ever asked for.